Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another update here by Agent by the Forecast. And this is not going to be a video related towards fall or winter. This is going to be a tropical related upload here on the new AOI we have in portions near the Cape Verde region off portions of Western Africa. So we do have a 10-20% area of interest here, and there's definitely a possibility it can become something very interesting, whether it's an invest, and I would not rule out the possibility that it can become a tropical depression. However, that is still, in my book, very, very unlikely that's going to happen, but definitely watching out whether we can get another invest in the Atlantic to get us tied once again with the Eastern Pacific invest wise. So that would definitely be very interesting. I'm going to be looking at overall the conditions, where this storm is expected to go, and just overall whether it's favorable for the form or not. So if you want to know about that, I recommend watching the whole video, and I also recommend subscribing to the channel. But without further ado, let's get in the video. So here's now the latest look here at the 5-day tropical weather outlook. Obviously, this did come out at 2 p.m. Eastern time, so we're going to be watching out for the next advisory around 8 p.m. Eastern time as well. See whether it does increase in probability. Personally, I think it may increase in probabilities, but only by 10% for both 2 days and 5 days. But I definitely think there's a chance it could definitely become something very interesting here, especially before the next 3 days or so. So here's a latest look here at the actual AOI. So there we have a surface trough. Actually, you guys can't even see the probability, but it's basically 10% for the next 48 hours and a 20% for the next 5 days. So we have a trough of low pressure over the far eastern Atlantic Ocean, centered a few hundred miles south of Cabo Verde Islands. Basically, this is basically coming from a AEW, which is basically African Eastern Wave. So we're kind of seeing obviously an area of deepening low, and so overall a tropical trough associated with this. Some development of the system is possible during the next couple of days, while it moves northward or northwestward before the system moves over cool waters by Thursday. So the thing really has to get its act together and form before Thursday, because by Thursday it's going to start shifting and steering to the west, meaning it'll encounter a lot more dry air, as well overall some Saharan dust, and as well going to be encountering some very cold waters. Obviously, this cold water we're talking about could very well sustain a tropical depression, but definitely it's got maybe 60-ish hours before the conditions really diminish. So this was the latest look here of the actual satellite imagery, visible satellite imagery before obviously it got dark over here, but you can kind of see an area of just very widespread cloud cover and some tropical and scattered overall thunderstorms around this area of trough. This obviously tropical trough that is associated with this African easterly wave. You kind of seeing a ton of areas of moisture. Basically, there's really high relative humidity. There's not really much dry air with this. So the Kelvin waves kind of really passed the MDR. There's a little bit still divergence kind of just off Africa. That's most likely how this system has become an area of interest, because there's still a little bit of rising air and as well as some divergence left from the Kelvin wave that just passed a few days ago. So overall conditions aren't too shabby, because obviously I mentioned that the conditions were really bad across the Atlantic. We had a lot of high pressure, a lot of sinking air, but where this region off Africa is, there's actually decent conditions, especially if this system goes northward, staying away and obviously stalling away from that dry air and Saharan dust that's kind of towards the west and to the north. However, even though there's a lot of dry air and even a lot of SAL specifically, as it goes northward, there's going to be a large moisture bubble associated with this, so it's going to help bend that dry air and eventually bend that SAL. But there's a lot of convection associated with this actual low pressure itself, so definitely very interesting. But right now it is quite disorganized. It's definitely not the best looking, but it's definitely something very interesting. We'll see what it looks like convection wise by tomorrow morning, whether it does go through a strengthening or at least a thermal maximum phase, I guess you could say that, see if it gets any convection or any structure whatsoever. So here's a look at the European probability of a tropical depression winds, and actually the European does have, this is going to be the main area to watch out, because obviously, like I did say, this is a pretty large African easterly wave, so there is going to be multiple or more than one low pressure associated within this trough, but the main one we're watching out for has a 40-50% for tropical depression winds. So like I just said, I wouldn't rule out the possibility for a tropical depression, even though there's cooler waters. Those water we're talking about is basically 25 degrees Celsius, which can easily sustain a tropical depression. But I think a depression is I wouldn't say very unlikely, but I think it's unlikely considering how tight it is from incredibly unfavorable conditions. It's kind of right on the edge. It's basically right on thin ice. So that's the main problem. As well, the timing is going to be a problem. It has to form within maybe less than 3 days, and if not, it's going to definitely have a pretty big trouble forming. But then once we get really past 2 to 5 days, that main area of interest does decrease in probabilities. However, there is going to be a pretty bigger probability after that, and possibly end or maybe a low pressure developing on the very end of that area of monsoon trough, and we actually do have a 50 to 60% for tropical depression winds there, and that's going to go far into portions of the deep MDR. But that's obviously not associated with the area of interest we have right now. Yeah. So like I said, this is obviously this low pressure watching out for. There's disturbed thunderstorms, and overall some convection is obviously from this trough, which is associated with this African easterly wave. You can kind of see a really large amount of moisture kind of coming off Africa, and this is the low pressure we're watching out for 1,010 millibars by the next 24 hours. So it's kind of sitting right there in that big, large area of moisture, and actually going to be another wave kind of coming off. So it's going to make it pretty significant African easterly wave. However, there is still a lot of sinking air kind of right here. There is a little bit rising air just off Africa. However, if anything goes westward, it's going to get suffocated by dry air. And you can kind of see that significant Bermuda high. And then right here, we see these really strong and close isobars indicating we're seeing some really strong shear. And that's why we're seeing such dense dry air there, because of the amount of Saharan dust we're seeing getting picked up into the Atlantic. But a lot of dry air kind of associated right here within this strong shear. And as well, some pretty large dry air kind of combining from the Bermuda high. But this thing shouldn't be a problem. I know I said there's dry to the north, so how would it survive if it goes northward? Because there's going to be a pretty significant moisture bubble associated with it. However, like I just say, does not have timing is going to be a problem. But by the next 42 hours, the GFS is just have it at 1,008 millibars, which is definitely quite interesting. So this thing would have to form basically within the next maybe 48, 50, 55 hours, because if not, it's going to get completely suffocated by dry air once we get towards around August 6th, August 5th. But there's still going to be a pretty large area of moisture, pretty strong African easterly wave here in the MDR past August 6th and 7th. So that's going to definitely be interesting here, because there are a few low pressures, actually 1,014 millibars, 1,013, even 1,012 millibars. So overall, it's going to definitely be interesting, because this is a pretty large African easterly wave here. But right now, this current AOI we have, I wouldn't say it has much potential, but I think the likelihood of it becoming a tropical depression would probably be maybe 10 or 20%, but I would not really possibly. It does become an invest possibly by the next 24 hours or so. As I said, there is still some little bit rising air off Africa. You can kind of see it right there. This is current 0Z here on August 2nd. There is a little bit rising air, so it's not like there's really deep sinking air, but there is actually, again, some rising air, allowing for these thunderstorms in this area of interest to continue to rise and overall get its act together. So that's currently why we have an area of interest and possibly maybe seeing an invest, because of that rising air allowing these thunderstorms to develop, and that's what, overall just a deepening glow to strengthen. So it's also another reason why we're starting to see some lower pressure being spotted just to the west of Africa. So it's definitely very interesting here, but obviously after that, by August 7th, there's going to be some sinking air once again. But the main area to watch out for is going to be the MJO as it pushes into the Atlantic very soon within the next week or so. Another thing that's obviously quite favorable, or at least not super duper unfavorable, but a little bit favorable still somewhat, if that made sense, hopefully. But another factor to why there is another area of interest off Africa right now at this point is because there is going to be some divergence here, and also some negative VPU. So we are going to be seeing some easterly winds here. That's exactly how I know it's an African easterly wave. Obviously, it's not a Kelvin wave. The Kelvin wave has really passed mainly. And as well, here's the MJO. The MJO is not part of the MJO. It's kind of just part of the African easterly wave here, really small, but still a significant wave that's coming off or that's going towards Africa, but kind of still stalling around Africa itself. So it's going to bring those easterly winds here. So definitely going to keep a very close eye on that, because there's not really there's a lot of divergence, or a decent amount of divergence. There is some rising air. There is an African easterly wave with negative VPU, so it's definitely something to keep a close eye on. That's why there is a decent chance, or that's why there's not a 0% for tropical depression, and that's why there is basically maybe a 10 or 20%. We can also spot this wave here by looking at the precipitated water. There is a ton of precipitated water kind of just near Africa. You can kind of see the easterly movement of that easternly, or you can see the eastern movement of the precipitated water. So it's exactly where we are seeing that easterly winds there associated with this wave off Africa. So there is a lot of precipitated water. There's a lot of looks like there's going to be a lot of evaporation, so definitely watching out for some more thunderstorms and possibly convection start popping up off Africa. It'll definitely be interesting as the storm starts to move northward. So let's actually get a look at what some models are showing here where this low pressure track will go. So let's look here at the GEFS. So there you have that low pressure to the south of the Cape Verde Islands over there near portions of Africa, that general region. So that's where we have the low right now, going, looks like it's slightly going to be going slightly west and then pulling to the north. So you can kind of see a few pressures are looking like 1,013, 1,014, 1,015. So it's obviously going to be a little bit higher on the higher side because there's a small trough here that's bringing some lower pressure. That's the reason why we are looking at maybe as low as 1,008, but that's going to be later on. But then you see they start to pull to the northwest. And once it starts pulling northwest to the west, there is going to be a lot of dry areas there. You see the Bermuda high up here, that higher pressure, as well as some dry air kind of sitting right here towards the west. So once it starts going west, it's going to get just absolutely just suffocated. So it has to go north for a little bit longer. The further it goes north at a slower rate, the better it has a chance. So if it goes north too fast, obviously it's going to go into cooler water. So it's going to really help just diminish the chances of any development at all. And if it turns to west too quickly, it's going to just get suffocated by dry air. So it has to follow a very, very tight schedule. It has to go northward, not too fast, though. If not, it's not going to have any time to develop or get its act together. Let's get looking at another few tracks here. So let's actually make sure that this is 18Z. As well, they are also showing going northward, but actually a little bit lower pressure, though, maybe getting up to 1,006 to 1,007 millibars. So let's actually get a look at that, though. So we actually have a better look at the 18Z here on the ECNS there. We have an area of 1,010 millibars, and then it really dropped to 1,007, 1,008, and looking at maybe possibly 30 miles an hour. So it's definitely interesting here. If this ECNS or ECNS does verify, there's definitely a small possibility it could become a tropical depression, very short-lived tropical depression, but actually these have it kind of turning to the northwest a lot sooner, though, because obviously GFS had it turning kind of towards the north of the Cape Verde Islands, and if that were to verify, that would have a better chance, even though they have lower pressure there. But it would have to really get out together within 24 hours if it wants to become anything before it starts to go into the west. But either way, there's something very interesting here, and even possibly, like I just say, maybe some more lows into the backside of that AEW. So definitely going to be watching out for the MDR for the next few days. So let's now get a look here at the actual model guidances here. So if you look at the GFS, there you see that area of moisture and a lot of scattered thunderstorms, and overall a few low pressure. Looks like we have around one to the southwest and one right where the actual AOI is. So we do have a few low pressure associated with that trough right there in that area of lower pressure. And then you see the GFS has it at 1,010 millibars within the next 24 hours. And then getting up to 1,008 millibars up to the next 42 hours as it goes just to the northeast of Cape Verde, and then turns to northwest and just dissipates from that strong dry air right there associated with the SAL. Let's not get a look at the actual vorticity. The GFS really not showing much vorticity within the system at all. You see a little signature there of some closed isobars indicating we do have a low pressure in that, but very, very small and not very tight vorticity at all. So that would definitely be maybe invest worthy, but I would definitely not see that in any depression. Really, that would be very, very small wind field for depression there. But that's just, again, this is very little confidence really in this really. But again, it could become an invest. That's definitely a possibility. But like I did say, even though there's a really high pressure across the Atlantic right now, above average pressure, there is going to be some below average pressure and actually some low deepening pressure associated with this AEW. That's exactly where that low pressure is going to be, right there at 1,010 millibars. Then it deepens to 1,008 millibars. However, that trough, the trough weakens, allowing for a lot higher pressure that's going to help as well possibly kill that system. And actually, there's a lot of shear where this storm is, or just to the south of where that low pressure is. So if it goes northward, it's going to go into a more favorable environment. So also, if it goes northward, that would definitely be another pro. Not only will a pro be that it goes into, or it stays away from the shear, but it stays away from the dry air, and it has a moisture bow following it, helping it giving it a chance to shrink it. How there are a few cons, obviously. Cons is that there's obviously going to be cooler waters in that region as it goes northward. But it's definitely interesting, and I would definitely keep an eye on it.